All right, so thank you for our last chat. Like I said before, we are going to have a full-on open mic discussion of all our panelists to submit for the July 10th hearing responses. We have done several of them before. NRB has done for the Department of Labor, for the current FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Their strategic plan for 2018 has actually our language from NRB that we submitted. And so we're very, also with the SBA and several other different responses that we give out. So we're very well versed in that. And this is our forte, what we do, is reporting on the information to connect the dots to the community. So we have here today Karen Przypyszny. Did I say that right? Przypyszny. Or can't using my phonetics here, can't get it. Very interesting, the work that she does and has been involved in. She was one of our panelists in July with Quinn on the Opportunity Zones back then and 6 months ago, and really brought together a dynamic from the low to moderate income, affordable housing, studies that they've been doing for 30 years and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, and you go ahead and take it away about the work you've been doing and what the organization's been doing.
All right, great. Thanks, Desiree. And I'm glad to have everybody here after lunch just to kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing. So I have been working in the low-income housing affordable community development area for the past 30 years. And currently I am working on special initiatives with the National Equity Fund. So National Equity Fund is a nonprofit, and we're a subsidiary of a local, larger community development coordinator called Local Initiative Support Corporation. And between us, we are syndicators of the low-income housing tax credit. We provide loans to low-income communities, we do capacity building, we provide grants, and through the New Markets Support Corporation, another affiliate, we also do investments in New Markets tax credit projects, which are economic development and business deals. So from what I do on the National Equity Fund, we have on an annual basis been investing about $1 billion a year into affordable housing in low-income census tracts. But when you look at the fact that in the opportunity zones, there's 8,300 or so of opportunity zones, between what NEF and LISC and New Market Support Corporation have done, we've already been working in about 900 of those zones. So we come to this area and we're excited about opportunity zones because we look at the fact that the low-income housing tax credit probably brings in about $10 billion a year of investments into low-income housing, and that's really helping to provide housing for persons at 60% of AMI and under. And most of those benefits of those tax credits can't be used by individuals. So we have a lot of financial institutions and insurance companies that are really the investors in those projects. And then we have the New Market Support Corporation, which also has most financial institutions as those investors. And if we look at the fact now that through opportunity zones we've got capital gains dollars of $1 trillion, that's just a whole new amount of financial capital that can really be brought into a lot of these low-income communities where we feel we've already been working and maybe bring in new capital dollars to do new types of investments. And so we are really focused at NEF and LISC in trying to figure out how to make that work. How can we direct this new program to help provide projects that provide social impact to the community and benefit those communities that we are located in. And just real quickly, what we are really focused on is the fact that if you look at, we've been working with the low-income housing tax credit, we don't think that there will be a lot of new capital dollars coming in to finance low-income housing tax credit deals. But these communities have a lot of low-income housing, and sometimes they have some high-end housing, and we think there's this lost middle market of housing for people between 60 to 120% of AMI, what we also call workforce housing. And I think the Opportunity Zone program is just set up really well to help to finance workforce housing in these markets. If you look at the fact that it can be a 10-year investment, that you can provide cash flow, that you can set them up, as you've heard people talk about, is a very good investment in real estate that can be directed at people with that middle income kind of targeted rent. We think that can work really well. And we ourselves have to look at the fact that financial institutions can also invest in that, but we think that other capital gains investors, high net worth individuals will probably also be very interested in this product. And then we're also looking to see what we can do around creating new businesses, investing in charter schools, which will be a little harder for us to develop as we work through things, but that's the other focus of what we're looking at.
That's excellent. I mean, here you have someone who's been doing this for 30 years. You're dealing with $1 billion fund, which is a very sizable fund, and playing into the strengths of really changing communities, lives, and social impact. So what has that brought to you in these 30 years that you've learned from investing into, this is really an opportunity zone, but we'll call it a different thing back in the day without the tax reform?
Right, so if you look at the fact that in 1986 was when the last Tax Reform Act came around, and that's when the low-income housing tax credit was actually established. And at that point in time, no one really thought that we could get investments in low-income communities. No one thought that there'd be developers that would go into these communities, and how do we make that work? And a lot of nonprofits really were the ones that first started out doing developments in low-income communities. And we started out doing this, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And over 30 years, I think you have to look at the fact that the community development field has really grown in their expertise. We now, given the fact that through the low-income housing tax credit program, we're doing almost $10 billion a year in investments, and we now have for-profit and nonprofits. The foreclosure rate on these types of properties in these locations is under 4%. And what that also means is that over time, what we've done is we have helped nonprofits grow capacity, brought in for-profit developers. We now underwrite low-income housing developments, affordable housing communities, just like you would underwrite any other property. We have real estate expertise on this. There's underwrite criteria. Quinn talked about needing to really look at all the risks on this, and we've heard about people talking about having experienced fund managers. And you have to look at the fact that the community development arena and those that are involved in it have all become very experienced financial professionals over time. And I think that we are a really good linkage into helping to find and to manage those projects in these low-income opportunity zone census tracts, because we understand how these communities work. And we also understand what developers have the capacity to make those deals work, and we understand how to asset manage these assets over a longer period of time. And we also understand all the compliance around it. If you look at the opportunity zone, while it's complicated, as we heard through that initial panel in terms of structuring it, but ongoing compliance, there is no ongoing compliance. We would love to have metrics around measuring things, but as compared to other programs that we currently manage, the ongoing compliance is really just making sure that our fund is in compliance with the IRS rules. There's really no compliance issues around the tenants in these buildings or the jobs that are there. So I think that we are well suited to do that, as are many people that have worked in the community development field.
Excellent. Well, you're basically coming to the town saying, as new as opportunity zones are, you have to remove the word, as we heard Tal say, that take out the fact that the opportunity zones is a tool and toolkit. It's really about the investment product. And you have 30 years in the organization in doing that. And then on top of that, you know the data analytics and the social impact, and have proven the scale of the $1 billion to $10 billion and how that played through the bigger picture. Even though we heard that the financial institutions, as we know, you have to have an approved fund and it has to go through the process. It's those side elements that make that difference. That's going to make a community more viable, in the sense of just not being an opportunity zone, by having other players come into the space also go with it. So if we move on then, and we go and say, how does the development expertise has changed in the community development field over the last 30 years?
Right, I think we've been talked about. I think that hearing from all these other people that have come forward that are doing real estate funds, I would say that those of us in the community development field now have equal expertise. So if you look at the fact that we have all of us that work in these communities, there's very strong underwriting, there's very strong project management, there's asset managers, we work with a really strong tax team as well. So I think that when I look at the community development field, it's really grown over the 30-year period, and that for people looking to invest now in low-income census tracts, maybe like pairing up with developers that have done more affordable housing, should feel free to vet those people out, because we vet them out just like we would vet out any for-profit developer doing things in any other market. And I think that's where the field has really grown to this point. That we are basically we do real estate development, we just do it in low-income communities, and we do it to the benefit of the residents in those communities. And we make sure that they have safe homes to be in, and that we make sure that those work for a long period of time. Generally, investments we do have to last for 15 years and then have an extended period for 30 years. So we are in for the long run.
That meets your 10-year rule. So if we were to look at your competitors, how many competitors do you have in your scale that are existing today? And if they defined you compared to Neff and List, is there anyone else like you?
There are other competitors within the low-income housing tax credit marketplace.
You have to mention about, like, are you one of 3, one of 5?
We're probably now one of like 30, to tell you the truth, of various ranges between that do small amounts of funds up to a very large amount. So it is a very competitive marketplace within that low-income tax credit marketplace. But those of us that really work in community, that do capacity building, that really help to look at economic development, to the growth of developers in these marketplaces, I would say that's a much smaller group of maybe 10 of us. They really focus on the whole community and how that works.
So if you look at, let's say, give an even dozen. The size of the United States, I think that's a very small number personally, because to know the ins and outs of each of the different state, down to the county, down to the local municipalities, can be exceptionally different, especially when you have different people coming in and being the mayors and or city councils changing. They can have their own flavor. You can go from one day to the next. And we've heard time and time again to where the local government could be so much more of a challenge than the federal government and or the state government. So, very interesting. I think that's a very low number.
I have to say that one thing that the whole area of community development finance has also grown. There's a lot of community development financial institutions that do lending to these types of products that have grown in the last several years as well. And the other thing that those of us that work in these communities and neighborhoods are aware of is how to work with the municipalities and with the governments there. And we understand the issues around zoning and neighborhoods and how to work through with the governments how to get this type of housing done. And I think we work with developers that have expertise in that as well. And I have to say one thing that we are trying to do at the moment is really work with municipalities and states to help them understand what opportunity zones are about and how that they can help to direct what type of development they'd like to see in those opportunity zones in their market. And what can they do to attract developers to that, to help to incentivize the type of projects they'd like to see, whether that's workforce housing, whether that's new business development, to try to help them with zoning issues, with permitting, with purchases of land. And that as communities can do this, that will help to make sure that this program brings in developments and projects that were anticipated underneath what the legislation intended it to be.
So we got 30 years worth of experience dealing with the government arena in this exact development of it, right? And we bring in now the Oz. How has that expanded your book of business and what you're doing?
So what we look at is the fact that what's been interesting is we've been talking to our development partners about opportunity zones. What we have found is people have, a lot of the groups we work with are excited about this because they're looking at this next stage housing. So when I look at opportunity zones and what it can bring to the National Equity Fund and to LISC, it helps us to bring in new investors. It helps us to bring in investors who have not been investing in these communities. It helps us do that next stage housing, which is at 60 to 120% of AMI. That basically takes, one developer said to me, Karen, he says, we have supportive housing, and we've got our low-income housing for families, and they've gotten some great services. A lot of these people are now doing really well. We want to get that next stage housing for them. We want to move them into workforce housing so we can open up units in the very low housing that we have, so we can bring in that next family. And they said to me, we think opportunity zones are the way to help us do that. And so we have a lot of partners like this, and I think this is helping us expand into that. And these same partners can then say, hey, we want to maybe look at expanding the retail in our neighborhoods, and how can we use opportunity zones to do that as well. So we look at this as a great expansion. If the opportunity zone initiative and program is used the right way, it can really benefit communities. There's a lot of, by the way, Desiree, issues about neighborhoods being gentrified because of this program, but I think if people really think about what communities want, and we basically, we being National Equity Fund LISC, are really trying to promote bringing in investments and projects that do benefit that community, and that's a big push of ours, and other people that are in the foundation community development space.
Excellent, excellent. So let's bring in a completely curveball. Natural disasters. Born and raised California. $306 billion worth of natural disasters in 2017 in the United States. Over $1 trillion of natural disasters going to happen in 2018. I'm sure you've all heard about Camp Fire that happened in Northern California. But what you might not know is they were burning 30 football fields per minute. Division, 30 football fields were burning per minute. You can't outrun it. Wiped out an entire town, everything, okay? So what's the mirror image of why Karen and I wanted to bring you into this panel and talk about is not just from the LMI side, but from the natural disaster side, rebuilding entire communities, reinvesting. Look at that, you got Hurricane Irma in Florida. You got Harvey, the 4th largest city in the United States with Houston. You've now got all these towns across the United States that are going to continue. They're only predicting more and more natural disasters every year in the United States. So these are opportunities for us to not only scale, like go back to Portal, talk about having your team to do development. Projections, like Quinn said, have to be on target, on market. But a funny scenario is that, do you know in Ventura County, which is in central, well, still Southern California, but right in central, born and raised in Ventura County, that you don't need a permit to build a home and still be legal. Let me rephrase that. Repeat that. You do not need a permit to build an entire home and still be legal in the county of Ventura. Why? If you're vetted with one of the dozens of contractors they have approved with the city and the county, you don't need to have a permit because they don't have the staff to process all the permits to rebuild all the homes that were lost last year, not this year. So when you look at that overwhelming consensus of what can be done by knowing the local community, be involved with the government, they have insurance programs that give you 120%. The county supervisor came in, and they have all these platforms. And here we had an event there, and some of the people we knew who were affected by the fire did not know that any of these parameters existed. So if you're a developer, imagine how many, as we heard from Quinn, how many single-family residences, the place she loves to be in, that she could go build 500 homes, boom, right? That are your perfect thing. So when we talk about opportunity zones, don't focus on, well, this is what the tax law says, and this is what I need to do. Focus on what other ways of developing and starting new venture capital. You know, I'm the business advisor for Amica's Brain, which is about AI reimagining dementia care through AI. And that is a startup company, right? Put it in an opportunity zone, boom. These are ways that we're connecting to make you think outside the box. Facilitate the vision.
So there is, I have to say, Puerto Rico is a opportunity zone. The entire state, the entire country is an opportunity zone, and the area around Houston, Harris County, there's a lot of opportunity zones around there as well. And we've been asked by Puerto Rico's brought in LISC, and we've also been asked by in Houston, we're talking to them there about how they can use disaster relief dollars from the federal government in conjunction with opportunity zone funds. of course, what we heard is that opportunity zones are, to do investments in opportunity zones, you do have to have projects that are almost ready to go by the end of 2019 in order to best use the program, or beginning of 2020. So it's really a matter of finding people who have sites and who are ready to go and who understand what's going on in those areas. And they're in these two markets, around Houston and Puerto Rico, there are a lot of federal dollars that can really help to make development happen and to decrease the financing costs that are required. So we've actually been talking to people who have been looking at, can they purchase buildings there and redevelop them? They can fit within the opportunity zone guidelines of doubling the basis. And what kind of dollars could they be bringing in to help them do that?
Excellent, excellent. Well, one last note before we open it up question and answers. I wanted to talk about, we talk about social impact, we talk about federal dollars, and regardless of the opportunity zones, if you think of the bigger play of natural disasters, which falls into the opportunity zone as far as reinvesting and everything, how many of you know that if you want to make an impact in your community, that you can get $40,000 to a renter and $200,000 to a homeowner if they've been affected by a natural disaster? $40,000 for a renter and $200,000 for a homeowner if they've been affected by a natural disaster for free. You want to make an impact, make sure you take the flyer that's sitting out in the front desk. So we sit on the SBA's national platform for a resource partner. And the thing is that we got a call a couple years ago saying, we only have 10,000 people that signed up for Hurricane Irma, and only $400 million we've given out. What's this program? So the SBA is the administrator of $40,000 they'll give you to a renter for a car, for a computer, for a phone, if you've been victimized by a natural disaster. $200,000 if you're a homeowner. The reason no one engages with them is because you see the what? SBA. I'm not a business owner, okay, bye. They're only the administrator. If you own a business, you get up to $2 million. Now the terms of this SBA's for the natural disaster for renters and homeowners is no application fee, no processing fee, no payment for the first year, and until a couple months ago, it's 1.75% interest. It's now been raised to 2%. I'm sorry. It's free money. Imagine how many people in this room, or if you're developing a community, or you want to go in and make an impact and do a social impact. You once said, this is a program and it would cost you nothing because you're not administrating it. There's no payment for you to do it, and all you just tell people about it. That's where we tie together that social impact and the experience that you have. We all have a little niche that we can plug into together. So does anyone have any open questions? I would love to ask Karen. You have a little mic on your table. Or they steal them all?
Hi, thank you. How do you hedge against political change? Let's say if, you mentioned the combination of local, state, and federal. You've got potential for party change to incumbents and the like, such that an investor can feel comfortable that they enter a deal midway through holding period, there's not going to be a disruptive change to their expectations. Can you speak on that, Sam?
I'm sure. So I think you have to look at, separate out two things. One is that right now, if you invest into workforce housing in an opportunity zone, most likely your capital stack is going to probably be, maybe as Quinn said and others, like 30 to 40% of equity through the opportunity zone and up to 60% of debt. And maybe in some cases you may have some soft money from the city or the state, let's call it home money or community development money that you may be able to put in. But once that's committed to that project and you close, that's already there. That's not going to change with other changes that occur in government or changes in who's mayor or governor of that state. So I don't think you really have to worry about that. The one benefit sometimes that people can have in these communities if they create housing that is, let's say 80% of AMI and unders, they can get a tax abatement. So, but that tax abatement is usually by legislative law, and it's usually shown for a specific period of time. So we won't invest into a project if we feel that any of these benefits that we're underwriting a project on are going to be taken away or are not going to be available for that 10 to 15-year period. Because then we can't count on them. And if we can't count on them because they're subject to political change or who is the mayor or that has to be some tax abatement has to be changed every year or voted on every year, then we're going to assume it's not there. It would be a benefit if we had it. But we want to know that our project will be well underwritten and be a good investment that can remain in place no matter what else is happening around it. Does that answer that? Yeah.
The number one thing from our perspective is that you have to still have a seat at the table. No matter who's in office, whether it's city, county, state, fed, you have to make sure that you have a representative and you attend the meetings and you keep a pulse and you know what's going on before it really happens. Because those are the opportunities that in a hindsight way is make those deal breakers. I remember when the financial meltdown happened and you were acquiring properties and people would have $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 liens on a house. And you're like, how did you have a $300,000 lien on a house when the house was only worth $150,000 in some of these rural areas? And it comes to be that they were charging you $1,000 per day per fine. I'm sorry, we didn't own it. How could you give me a fine? And then when we did own it, there was someone in it, we couldn't get them out. So I was able to very successfully for years through several different partners and clients we worked for to negotiate those down to almost nothing. And the reason I did that, my best case was $438,000 down to $11,284. And the reason was I had a standing relationship with them for years. So they were able to like, all right, well, we can waive this kind of stuff and this stuff because it's you, Desiree, will take care of it. But those are the kind of relationships that'll to get something done. And how many have ever gone into the change orders, like you heard with Quinn saying, how many change orders have to go through because the city or the inspector says, well, we got to do this, this, and this. If you get best of friends with whoever that department is, that is going to save you so much time and energy. Yes, you have to do your homework and yes, you have to spend a lot more time at the front end, but it's going to save you a whole lot of money and time on the back end. And when you have a lock of 30 months in the O's to make it work, you make sure you got your plays at the government. And that's why having the Federal Reserve here, having your local municipalities and state, having everyone on the same playing field. You got to have your play. You have to have a team of government interactive people that are well versed in that.
That's true. And that 30 months, just to also state, it gives you a lot of time when you think about that 30 months. Most of the multifamily housing projects that we invest in over time, that new construction or rehab, generally the time period from start until when they're completed is 18 to 24 months. So in that opportunity zone program, think of it by having 30 months to deploy your dollars. Just also gives you that little bit of extra time in case there are issues that crop up and you have to work with the municipality over something that happened or someone didn't give you a permit approval, that type of thing.
Stole all your concrete because they bought it from someone else.
I just want us to make sure, 18 months development, I just want to make sure because from my own experience in different areas, you say 18 months construction, are you speaking about from taking the property, doing site work, planning development, zoning, or whatever it is?
No, so I'm talking about from the time you close on the construction loan and start digging.
Okay, so this is mean that you have already all plan ready to go?
Ready to go. So if you think about it, the time period for pre-development for...
This is what I'm asking.
Right, so if you were today to go and just, here's a property, it's in an opportunity zone, right, and I would like to get it developed. You're gonna have to purchase that property, you're gonna have to make sure it's zoned correctly, you have to get... So that can take you, I would say, depending on the location, that could be 6 months minimum to a year.
Oh, 7 or 10 years.
Yes, you're right.
But let's go, you sit in 10,000 feet and you see a lot of development. Do you see a lot of projects in these locations that are ready to be hit ground. And somebody went and did all the development and prepared it for to build up and then willing to sell the property for a developer? It's something that you see in this area?
Right now? So right now, I'm actually looking right now at 8 separate projects that would be workforce housing deals across the country that are ready to go either by June or September of next year. So I think there are a lot of people out there that have projects that they are moving forward on now. And these are deals where they had already started, they have an option on that property, and they had already started on the architectural plans, and now they're looking at the fact that, hey, we can bring in opportunity zone capital that will help us lower the debt that we would have to get on the properties, maybe create more of a wide range of the rents that we could offer at these multifamily developments as well. So I think there are, I think projects, there's going to be more money out there right now, I believe, than there are projects. So we're all trying to find those projects that are ready to go and help get them to that starting point.
That's why John's comment saying that, you know, it's sadly that the rural areas could be overlooked, that the idea is that you're going to have less fierce competition in the rural areas, but your gain could be higher if you play your cards right, because why was it overlooked? Why? Just because the rural does not make it a bad deal. You have to look at the fact that is it prime ready, because Disney has to start somewhere. I mean, and you know, if you think of the development of long haul, so the idea is it gone through a developmental change? Look at your natural disaster areas. They're not going to be able to rebuild all of Campfire and or Paradise is actually it's a real city name. The city in 1 year. It's going to take several years, so 10 years to rebuild the entire city. You know, it's a prime opportunity. And they're still working on, you know, the opportunity zones. One of the things right now as they're talking about is, you know, they want expansion. They don't feel that they have enough opportunity zones. So they're talking about that. So I think one of the things we need to think about is everything is written is not concrete, that things happen and change. You know, they haven't come out with a new council just today, and we haven't got to January 10th yet. You know, things that the way I look at it is a moving target.